To give her children what each needs, to get the most from life he can, to work and play and live his best, is wise Old Mother Nature's plan. Old Granny Fox asked Reddy how he would like to eat a dinner of Bowser the Hound's. Reddy looked at her sharply to see if she were joking or really meant what she said. Granny looked so sober and so much in earnest that Reddy decided she couldn't be joking, even though it did sound that way. "I certainly would like it, Granny. Yes, indeed, I certainly would like it," said he. You don't suppose he will give us one, do you?" Granny chuckled. "No, Reddy," said she. "Bowser isn't so generous as all that, especially to foxes. He isn't going to give us that dinner. We are going to take it away from him. Yes, Sir, we just naturally are going to take it away from him." Reddy didn't for the life of him see how it could be possible to take a dinner away from Bowser the Hound. That seemed to him almost as impossible as it was for him to climb or fly or dive. But he had great faith in Granny's cleverness. He remembered how she had so nearly caught Quacker the Duck. He knew that all the time he had been away trying to find something for them to eat, old Granny Fox had been doing more than just rest her tired old bones. He knew that not for a single minute had her sharp wits been idle. He knew that all that time she had been studying and studying to find some way by which they could get something to eat. So great was his faith in Granny just then that if she had told him she would get him a slice of the moon, he would have believed her. "If you say we can take a dinner away from Bowser the Hound, I suppose we can," said Reddy, "though I don't see how. But if we can, let's do it right away. I'm hungry enough to dare almost anything for the sake of something to put in my stomach. It is so empty that little bit of fish we divided is shaking around as if it were lost. Gracious, I could eat 1,000,000 fish the size of that one. Have you thought of Farmer Brown's hens, Granny?" "Of course, Reddy, of course. What a silly question," replied Granny. "We may have to come to them yet." "I wish I was at them right now," interrupted Reddy with a sigh. "But you know what I have told you," went on Granny. "The surest way of getting into trouble is to steal hens. I'm not feeling quite up to being chased by Bowser the Hound just now, and if we came right home we would give away the secret of where we live and might be smoked out, and that would be the end of us. Besides, those hens will be hard to get this weather because they will stay in their house, and there is no way for us to get in there unless we walk right in broad daylight, and that would never do. It will be a great deal better to take Bowser's dinner away from him. In the first place, if we are careful, no one but Bowser will know about it, and as long as he is chained up, we will have nothing to worry about from him. Besides, we will enjoy getting even with him for the times he has spoiled our chances of catching a fat chicken, and for the way he has hunted us. Most decidedly, it will be better and safer to try for Bowser's dinner than to try for one of those chickens." "Just as you say, Granny, just as you say," returned Reddy. "You know best. But how under the sun we can do it beats me." "It is very simple," replied Granny. "Very simple indeed. Most things are simple enough when you find out how to do them. Neither of us could do it alone, but together we can do it without the least bit of risk. Listen." Granny went close to Reddy and whispered to him, although there wasn't a soul within hearing. A slow grin spread over Reddy's face as he listened. When she had finished, he laughed right out. "Granny, you are a wonder!" he exclaimed admiringly. "I never should have thought of that. Of course we can do it. My, won't Bowser be surprised! And how mad he'll be! Come on, let's be starting." "All right," said Granny, and the two started towards Farmer Brown's. The thing you've puzzled most about is simple once you've found it out. Bowser the Hound dearly loves to hunt just for the pleasure of the chase. It isn't so much the desire to kill as it is the pleasure of using that wonderful nose of his and the excitement of trying to catch someone, especially Granny or Reddy Fox. Farmer Brown's boy had put away his dreadful gun because he no longer wanted to kill the little people of the Green Forest and the Green Meadows, but rather to make them his friends. Bowser had missed the exciting hunts he used to enjoy so much with Farmer Brown's boy. So Bowser had formed the habit of slipping away alone for a hunt every once in a while. When Farmer Brown's boy discovered this, he got a chain and chained Bowser to his little house to keep him from running away and hunting on the sly. Of course, Bowser wasn't kept chained all the time. Oh my, no. When his master was about where he could keep an eye on Bowser, he would let him go free. But whenever he was going away and didn't want to take Bowser with him, he would chain Bowser up. Now, Bowser always had one good big meal a day. To be sure, he had scraps or a bone now and then besides, but once a day he had one good big meal served to him in a large tin pan. If he happened to be chained, it was brought out to him. If not, it was given to him just outside the kitchen door. Granny Fox knew all about this. Sly old Granny makes it her business to know the affairs of other people around her, because there is no telling when such knowledge may be of use to her. So Granny had watched Bowser the Hound when he and his master had no idea at all that she was anywhere about, and she had found out his ways, the usual hour for his dinner, and just how far that chain would allow him to go. It was such things which she had stored away in that shrewd old head of hers that made her so sure she and Reddy could take Bowser's dinner away from him. It was just about Bowser's dinner time when Granny and Reddy trotted across the snow-covered fields and crept behind the barn until they could peep around the corner. No one was in sight, not even Bowser, who was inside his warm little house at the end of the long shed back of Farmer Brown's house. Granny saw that he was chained, and a sly grin crept over her face. "You stay right here and watch until his dinner is brought out to him," said she to Reddy. "As soon as whoever brings it has gone back to the house, you walk right out where Bowser will see you. At the sight of you, he'll forget all about his dinner. Sit right down where he can see you and stay there until you see that I have got that dinner, or until you hear somebody coming, for you know Bowser will make a great racket. Then slip round back of the barn and join me back of that shed." So Reddy sat down to watch, and Granny left him. By and by, Mrs. Brown came out of the house with a pan full of good things. She put it down in front of Bowser's little house and called to him. Then she turned and hurried back, for it was very cold. Bowser came out of his little house, yawned, and stretched lazily. It was time for Reddy to do his part. Out he walked and sat down right in front of Bowser and grinned at him. Bowser stared for a minute as if he doubted his own eyes. Such impudence! Bowser growled. Then, with a yelp, he sprang towards Reddy. Now, the chain that held him was long, but Reddy had taken care not to get too near, and of course Bowser couldn't reach him. He tugged with all his might and yelped and barked frantically, but Reddy just sat there and grinned in the most provoking manner. It was great fun to tease Bowser this way. Meanwhile, old Granny Fox had stolen out from around the corner of the shed behind Bowser. Getting hold of the edge of the pan with her teeth, she pulled it back with her around the corner and out of sight. If she made any noise, Bowser didn't hear it. He was making too much noise himself and was too excited. Presently, Reddy heard the sound of an opening door. Mrs. Brown was coming to see what all the fuss was about. Like a flash, Reddy darted behind the barn, and all Mrs. Brown saw was Bowser tugging at his chain as he whined and yelped excitedly. "I guess he must have seen a stray cat or something," said Mrs. Brown, and went back in the house. Bowser continued to whine and tug at his chain for a few minutes. Then he gave it up and, growling deep in his throat, turned to eat his dinner. But there wasn't any dinner. It had disappeared, pan and all. Bowser couldn't understand it at all. Back of the shed, Granny and Reddy licked that pan clean, licked it until it was polished. Then, with little sighs of satisfaction, and every once in a while a chuckle, they trotted happily home. Investigate and for yourself find out those things which you want to know about. Never in all his life had Reddy Fox enjoyed a dinner more than that one he and Granny had stolen from Bowser the Hound. Of course, it would have tasted delicious anyway, because they were so dreadfully hungry. But to Reddy, it tasted better still because it had been intended for Bowser. Bowser has hunted Reddy so often that Reddy has no love for him at all, and it tickled him almost to death to think that they had taken his dinner from almost under his nose. With that good dinner in their stomachs, Reddy and Granny Fox felt so much better that the Great World no longer seemed such a cold and cruel place. Funny how differently things look when your stomach is full from the way those same things look when it is empty. Best of all, they knew they could play the same sharp trick again and steal another dinner from Bowser if need be. It is a comforting feeling, a very comforting feeling, to know for a certainty where you can get another meal. It is a feeling that Granny and Reddy Fox and many other little people of the Green Meadows and the Green Forest seldom have in winter. As a rule, when they have eaten one meal, they haven't the least idea where the next one is coming from. How would you like to live that way? The very next day, Granny and Reddy went up to Farmer Brown's at Bowser's dinner hour. But this time, Farmer Brown's boy was at work near the barn, and Bowser was not chained. Granny and Reddy stole away as silently as they had come. On the day following, they found Bowser chained and stole another dinner from him. Then they went away laughing until their sides ached as they heard Bowser's whines of surprise and disappointment when he discovered that his dinner had vanished. They knew by the sound of his voice that he hadn't the least idea what had become of that dinner. Now there was someone else roaming over the snow-covered meadows and through the Green Forest and the Old Pasture these days, with a stomach so lean and empty that he couldn't think of anything else. It was Old Man Coyote. You know, he is very clever, is Old Man Coyote, and he managed to find enough food of one kind and another to keep him alive, but never enough to give him that comfortable feeling of a full stomach. While he wasn't actually starving, he was always hungry. So he spent all the time when he wasn't sleeping in hunting for something to eat. Of course, he often ran across the tracks of Granny and Reddy Fox, and once in a while he would meet them. It struck Old Man Coyote that they didn't seem as thin as he was. That set him to thinking. Neither of them was a smarter hunter than he. In fact, he prided himself on being smarter than either of them. Yet, when he met them, they seemed to be in the best of spirits, and not at all worried because food was so scarce. Why? There must be a reason. They must be getting food of which he knew nothing. "I'll just keep an eye on them," muttered Old Man Coyote. So, very slyly and cleverly, Old Man Coyote followed Granny and Reddy Fox, taking the greatest care that they should not suspect that he was doing it. All one night he followed them through the Green Forest and over the Green Meadows, and when at last he saw them go home, appearing not at all worried because they had caught nothing, he trotted off to his own home to do some more thinking. "They are getting food somewhere, that is sure," he muttered, as he scratched first one ear and then the other. Somehow he could think better when he was scratching his ears. "If they don't get it in the night, and they certainly didn't get anything this night, They must get it in the daytime. I've done considerable hunting myself in the daytime, and I haven't once met them in the Green Forest, or seen them on the Green Meadows, or up in the Old Pasture. I wonder if they are stealing Farmer Brown's hens and haven't been found out yet. I've kept away from there myself, but if they can steal hens and not be caught, I certainly can. There never was a fox yet smart enough to do a thing that a coyote cannot do if he tries. I think I'll slip up where I can watch Farmer Brown's and see what is going on up there. Yes, sir, that's what I'll do." With this, Old Man Coyote grinned, then curled himself up for a short nap, for he was tired. No one ever is so smart that someone else may not prove to be smarter still. Listen, and you shall hear all about 3 rogues. 2 were in red and were Granny and Reddy Fox, and 1 was in gray and was Old Man Coyote. They were the slyest, smartest rogues on all the Green Meadows or in all the Green Forest. All 3 had started out to steal the same dinner, but the funny part is they didn't intend to steal it from the same person. And still funnier is that one of them didn't even know where that dinner was or what kind of dinner it would be. True to his resolve to know what Granny and Reddy Fox were getting to eat and where they were getting it, Old Man Coyote hid where he could see what was going on about Farmer Brown's, for it was there he felt sure that Granny and Reddy were getting food. He had waited only a little while when along came Granny and Reddy Fox past the place where Old Man Coyote was hiding. They didn't see him. Of course not. He took care that they should have no chance. But anyway, they were not thinking of him. Their thoughts were all of that dinner they intended to have, and the smart trick by which they would get it. So with their thoughts all on that dinner, they slipped up behind the barn and prepared to work the trick which had been so successful before. Old Man Coyote crept after them. He saw Reddy Fox lie down where he could peep around the corner of the barn to watch Bowser the Hound and to see that no one else was about. He saw Granny leave Reddy there and hurry away. Old Man Coyote's wits worked fast. "I can't be in 2 places at once," thought he. "So I can't watch both Granny and Reddy. As I can watch but one, which one shall it be? Granny, of course. Granny is the smartest of the 2, and whatever they are up to, she is at the bottom of it. Granny is the one to follow." So, like a gray shadow, crafty Old Man Coyote stole after Granny Fox and saw her hide behind the corner of the shed, at the end of which was the little house of Bowser the Hound. He crept as near as he dared and then lay flat down behind a little bunch of dead grass close to the shed. For some time nothing happened, and Old Man Coyote was puzzled. Every once in a while Granny Fox would look behind and all about to be sure that no danger was near, but she didn't see Old Man Coyote. After what seemed to him a long time, he heard a door open on the other side of the shed. It was Mrs. Brown carrying Bowser's dinner out to him. Of course, Old Man Coyote didn't know this. He knew by the sounds that someone had come out of the house, and it made him nervous. He didn't like being so close to Farmer Brown's house in broad daylight. But he kept his eyes on Granny Fox, and he saw her ears prick up in a way that he knew meant that those sounds were just what she had been waiting for. "If she isn't afraid, I don't need to be," thought he craftily. After a few minutes he heard a door close, and knew that whoever had come out had gone back into the house. Almost at once Bowser the Hound began to yelp and whine. Swiftly Granny Fox disappeared around the corner of the shed. Just as swiftly Old Man Coyote ran forward and peeped around the corner. There was Bowser the Hound tugging at his chain, and just beyond his reach was Reddy Fox, grinning in the most provoking manner. And there was Granny Fox, backing and dragging after her Bowser's dinner. In a flash, Old Man Coyote understood the plan, and he almost chuckled aloud at the cleverness of it. Then he hastily backed behind the shed and waited. In a minute, Granny Fox appeared, dragging Bowser's dinner. She was so intent on getting that dinner that she almost backed into Old Man Coyote without suspecting that he was anywhere about. "Thank you, Granny. You needn't bother about it any longer. I'll take it now," growled Old Man Coyote in Granny's ear. Granny let go of that dinner as if it had burned her tongue, and with a frightened little yelp leapt to one side. A minute later, Reddy came racing around from behind the barn, eager for his share. What he saw was Old Man Coyote bolting down that twice-stolen dinner, while Granny Fox fairly danced with rage. You'll find as on through life you go, the thing you want may prove to be the very thing you shouldn't have, then seeming loss is gain, you see. If ever two folks were mad away through, those two were Granny and Reddy Fox, as they watched Old Man Coyote gobble up the dinner they had so cleverly stolen from Bowser the Hound. It was bad enough to lose the dinner, but it was worse to see someone else eat it after they had worked so hard to get it. "Robber!" snarled Granny. Old Man Coyote stopped eating long enough to grin. "Thief! Sneak! Coward!" snarled Reddy. Once more, Old Man Coyote grinned. When that dinner had disappeared down his throat to the last and smallest crumb, he licked his chops and turned to Granny and Reddy. "I'm very much obliged for that dinner," said he pleasantly, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "It was the best dinner I have had for a long time. Allow me to say that that trick of yours was as smart a trick as ever I have seen. It was quite worthy of a coyote. You are a very clever old lady, Granny Fox. Now I hear someone coming, and I would suggest that it would be best for all concerned if we were not seen about here." He darted off behind the barn like a gray streak, and Granny and Reddy followed, for it was true that someone was coming. You see, Bowser the Hound had discovered that something was going on around the corner of the shed, and he made such a racket that Mrs. Brown had come out of the house to see what it was all about. By the time she got there, all she saw was the empty pan which had held Bowser's dinner. She was puzzled. How that pan could be where it was she couldn't understand, and Bowser couldn't tell her, although he tried his very best. She had been puzzled about that pan 2 or 3 times before. Old Man Coyote lost no time in getting back home, for he never felt easy near the home of man in broad daylight. Granny and Reddy Fox went home too, and there was hate in their hearts, hate for Old Man Coyote. But once they reached home, old Granny Fox stopped growling, and presently she began to chuckle. "What are you laughing at?" demanded Reddy. "At the way Old Man Coyote stole that dinner from us," replied Granny. "I hate him! He's a sneaking robber!" snapped Reddy. "Tut, tut, Reddy, tut, tut!" retorted Granny. "Be fair-minded. We stole that dinner from Bowser the Hound, and Old Man Coyote stole it from us. I guess he is no worse than we are, when you come to think of it. Now is he?" Well, I don't suppose he is, when you put it that way," Reddy admitted grudgingly. "And he was smart, very smart, to outwit 2 such clever people as we are," continued Granny. "You will have to agree to that." "Yes," said Reddy slowly. "He was smart enough, but—" "There isn't any but, Reddy," interrupted Granny. "You know the law of the Green Meadows and the Green Forest. It is everybody for himself, and anything belongs to one who has the wit or the strength to take it. We had the wit to take that dinner from Bowser the Hound, and Old Man Coyote had the wit to take it from us and the strength to keep it. It was all fair enough, and you know there isn't the least use in crying over spilled milk, as the saying is. We simply have got to be smart enough not to let him fool us again. I guess we won't get any more of Bowser's dinners for a while. We've got to think of some other way of filling our stomachs when the hunting is poor. I think if I could just have one of those fat hens of Farmer Brown's, it would put new strength into my old bones. All summer I warned you to keep away from that henyard, but the time has come now when I think we might try for a couple of those hens." Reddy pricked up his ears at the mention of fat hens. "I think so too," said he. "When shall we try for one?" "Tomorrow morning," replied Granny. "Now, don't bother me while I think out a plan." Full half success for fox or man is won by working out a plan. Granny Fox knows this. No one knows it better. Whatever she does is first carefully planned in her wise old head. So now, after she had decided that she and Reddy would try for one of Farmer Brown's fat hens, she lay down to think out a plan to get that fat hen. No one knew better than she how foolish it would be to go over to that henyard and just trust to luck for a chance to catch one of those biddies. Of course, they might be lucky and get a hen that way, but then again, they might be unlucky and get in a peck of trouble. "You see," said she to Reddy, "we must not only plan how to get that fat hen, but we must also plan how to get away with it safely. If only there was some way of getting in that henhouse at night, then there would be no trouble at all. I don't suppose there is the least chance of that." "Not the least chance in the world," replied Reddy. "There isn't a hole anywhere big enough even for Shadow the Weasel to get through, and Farmer Brown's boy is very careful to lock the door every night." "There's a little hole that the hens go in and out of during the day, which is big enough for one of us to slip through, I believe," said Granny thoughtfully. "Sure, but it's always closed at night," snapped Reddy. "Besides, to get to that, or the door, either, you have got to get inside the henyard, and there's a gate to that which we can't open." "People are sometimes careless, even you, Reddy," said Granny. Reddy squirmed uneasily, for he had been in trouble many times through carelessness. "Well, what of it?" he demanded a wee bit crossly. "Nothing much. Only if that henyard gate should happen to be left open, and if Farmer Brown's boy should happen to forget to close that little hole that the hens go through, and if we happen to be around at just that time—" "Too many ifs to get a dinner with," interrupted Reddy. "Perhaps," replied Granny mildly. "But I've noticed that it is the one who has an eye open for all the little ifs in life that fares the best. Now, I've kept an eye on that henyard, and I've noticed that very often Farmer Brown's boy doesn't close the henyard gate at night. I suppose he thinks that if the henhouse door is locked, the gate doesn't matter. Anyone who is careless about one thing is likely to be careless about another. Sometime he may forget to close that hole. I told you that we would try for one of those hens tomorrow morning, but the more I think about it, the more I think it will be wiser to visit that henhouse a few nights before we run the risk of trying to catch a hen in broad daylight. In fact, I'm pretty sure I can make Farmer Brown's boy forget to close that gate." "How?" demanded Reddy eagerly. Granny grinned. "I'll try it first and tell you afterwards," said she. "I believe Farmer Brown's boy closes the henhouse up just before jolly round red Mr. Sun goes to bed behind the Purple Hills, doesn't he?" Reddy nodded. Many times from a safe hiding place he had hungrily watched Farmer Brown's boy shut the biddies up. It was always just before the Black Shadows began to creep out from their hiding places. "I thought so," said Granny. The truth is, she knew so. There was nothing about that henhouse and what went on there that Granny didn't know quite as well as Reddy. "You stay right here this afternoon until I return. I'll see what I can do." "Let me go along," begged Reddy. "No," replied Granny in such a decided tone that Reddy knew it would be of no use to tease. Sometimes Two can do what one cannot do alone, and sometimes one can do what two might spoil. Now, we may as well take a nap until it is time for Mr. Sun to go to bed. Just you leave it to your old granny to take care of the first of those ifs. For the other, we'll have to trust to luck. But you know we are lucky sometimes. With this, Granny curled up for a nap, and, having nothing better to do, Reddy followed her example. How easy 'tis to just forget, until at last it is too late. The most methodical of folks sometimes forget to shut the gate. Farmer Brown's boy is not usually the forgetful kind. He is pretty good about not forgetting. But Farmer Brown's boy isn't perfect by any means. He does forget sometimes, and he is careless sometimes. He would be a funny kind of boy otherwise. But take it day in and day out, he is pretty thoughtful and careful. The care of the hens is one of Farmer Brown's boy's duties. It is one of those duties which most of the time is a pleasure. He likes the biddies, and he likes to take care of them. Every morning, one of the first things he does is to feed them and open the hen house so that they can run in the hen yard if they want to. Every night he goes out just before dark, collects the eggs, and locks the hen house so that no harm can come to the biddies while they are asleep on their roosts. After the big snowstorm, he had shoveled a place in the hen yard where the hens could come out and exercise and get a sun bath when they wanted to. And in the very warmest part of the clay they would do this. Always in the daytime he took the greatest care to see that the henyard gate was fastened, for no one knew better than he how bold Granny and Reddy Fox can be when they are very hungry, and in winter they are very apt to be very hungry most of the time. So he didn't intend to give them a chance to slip into that henyard while the biddies were out, or to give the biddies a chance to stray outside where they might be still more easily caught. But at night he sometimes left that gate open, as Granny Fox had found out. You see, he thought it didn't matter because the hens were locked in their warm house and so were safe anyway. It was just at dusk of the afternoon of the day when Granny and Reddy Fox had talked over a plan to get one of those fat hens that Farmer Brown's boy collected the eggs and saw to it that the biddies had gone to roost for the night. He had just started to close the little sliding door across the hole through which the hens went in and out in the daytime, when Bowser the Hound began to make a great racket, as if terribly excited about something. Farmer Brown's boy gave the little sliding door a hasty push, picked up his basket of eggs, locked the henhouse door, and hurried out through the gate without stopping to close it. You see, he was in a hurry to find out what Bowser was making such a fuss about. Bowser was yelping and whining and tugging at his chain, and it was plain to see that he was terribly eager to be set free. "What is it, Bowser, old boy? Did you see something?" asked Farmer Brown's boy, as he patted Bowser on the head. "I can't let you go, you know, because you probably would go off hunting all night and come home in the morning all tired out and with sore feet. Whatever it was, I guess you've scared it out of a year's growth, old fellow, so we'll let it go at that." Bowser still tugged at his chain and whined, but after a little while he quieted down. His master looked around behind the barn to see if he could see what had so stirred up Bowser, but nothing was to be seen, and he returned, patted Bowser once more, and went into the house, never once giving that open henyard gate another thought. Half an hour later, old Granny Fox joined Reddy Fox, who was waiting on the doorstep of their home. "It's all right, Reddy. That gate is open," said she. "How did you do it, Granny?" asked Reddy eagerly. "Easily enough," replied Granny. "I let Bowser get a glimpse of me just as his master was locking up the hen gate. Bowser made a great fuss, and of course Farmer Brown's boy hurried out to see what it was all about. He was in too much of a hurry to close that gate, and afterwards he forgot all about it, or else he thought it didn't matter. Of course, I didn't let him get so much as a glimpse of me." "Of course," said Reddy. "By those who win 'tis well agreed, he'll try and try who would succeed." It seemed to Reddy Fox as if time never had dragged so slowly as it did this particular night, while he and Granny Fox waited until Granny thought it was safe to visit Farmer Brown's henhouse and see if by any chance there was a way of getting into it. Reddy tried not to hope too much. Granny had found a way to get the gate to the henyard left open, but this would do them no good unless there was some way of getting into the house, and this he very much doubted. But if there was a way, he wanted to know it, and he was impatient to start. But Granny was in no hurry. Not that she wasn't as hungry for a fat hen as was Reddy, but she was too wise and clever and altogether too sly to run any risks. "There is nothing gained by being in too much of a hurry, Reddy," said she, "and often a great deal is lost in that way. A fat hen will taste just as good a little later as it would now, and it will be foolish to go up to Farmer Brown's until we are sure that everybody up there is asleep. But to ease your mind, I'll tell you what we will do. We'll go where we can see Farmer Brown's house and watch until the last light winks out." So they trotted to a point where they could see Farmer Brown's house, and there they sat down to watch. It seemed to Reddy that those lights never would wink out, but at last they did. "Come on, Granny!" he cried, jumping to his feet. "Not yet, Reddy, not yet," replied Granny. "We've got to give folks time to get sound asleep. If we should get into that henhouse, those hens might make a racket, and if anything like that is going to happen, we want to make sure that Farmer Brown and Farmer Brown's boy are asleep." This was sound advice, and Reddy knew it. So, with a groan, he once more threw himself down on the snow to wait. At last Granny arose, stretched, and looked up at the twinkling stars. "Come on," said she, and led the way. Up back of the barn and around it they stole like two shadows, and quite as noiselessly as shadows. They heard Bowser the Hound sighing in his sleep in his snug little house, and grinned at each other. Silently they stole over to the henyard. The gate was open, just as Granny had told Reddy it would be. Across the henyard they trotted swiftly, straight to where, more than once in the daytime, they had seen the hens come out of the house through a little hole. It was closed. Reddy had expected it would be. Still, he was dreadfully disappointed. He gave it merely a glance. "I knew it wouldn't be any use," said he, with half a whine. But Granny paid no attention to him. She went close to the hole and pushed gently against the little door that closed it. It didn't move. Then she noticed that at one edge there was a tiny crack. She tried to push her nose through, but the crack was too narrow. Then she tried a paw. A claw caught on the edge of the door, and it moved ever so little. Then Granny knew that the little door wasn't fastened. Granny stretched herself flat on the ground and went to work, first with one paw, then with the other. By and by she caught her claws in it just right again, and it moved a wee bit more. No, most certainly that door wasn't fastened, and that crack was a little wider. "What are you wasting your time there for?" demanded Reddy crossly. "We'd better be off hunting if we would have anything to eat this night." Granny said nothing, but kept on working. She had discovered that this was a sliding door. Presently the crack was wide enough for her to get her nose in. Then she pushed and twisted her head this way and that. The little door slid back, and when Reddy turned to speak to her again, for he had had his back to her, she was nowhere to be seen. Reddy just gaped and gaped foolishly. There was no Granny Fox, but there was a black hole where she had been working, and from it came the most delicious smell, the smell of fat hens. It seemed to Reddy that his stomach fairly flopped over with longing. He rubbed his eyes to make sure that he was awake. Then, in a twinkling, he was inside that hole himself. "Shh! Be still!" whispered old Granny Fox. Dark deeds are done in the still of night. Who shall say if they're wrong or right? It depends on how you look at things. Of course, Granny and Reddy Fox had no business to be in Farmer Brown's henhouse in the middle of the night, or at any other time for that matter. That is, they had no business to be there, as Farmer Brown would look at the matter. He would have called them two red thieves. Perhaps that is just what they were. But looking at the matter as they did, I am not so sure about it. To Granny and Reddy Fox, those hens were simply big, rather stupid birds, splendid eating if they could be caught, and bound to be eaten by somebody. The fact that they were in Farmer Brown's henhouse didn't make them his any more than the fact that Mrs. Grouse was in a part of the Green Forest owned by Farmer Brown made her his. You see, among the little meadow and forest people, there is no such thing as property rights, excepting in the matter of storehouses, and because these hens were alive, it didn't occur to Granny and Reddy that the henhouse was a sort of storehouse. It would have made no difference if it had. Among the little people, it is considered quite right to help yourself from one another's storehouse, if you are smart enough to find it and really need the food. Besides, Reddy and Granny knew that Farmer Brown and his boy would eat some of those hens themselves, and they didn't begin to need them as Reddy and Granny did. So, as they looked at the matter, there was nothing wrong with being in that henhouse in the middle of the night. They were there simply because they needed food very, very much, and food was there. They stared up at the roosts where the biddies were huddled together, fast asleep. They were too high up to be reached from the floor, even when Reddy and Granny stood on their hind legs and stretched as far as they could. "We've got to wake them up and scare them so that some of the silly things will fly down where we can catch them," said Reddy, licking his lips hungrily. "That won't do at all," snapped Granny. "They would make a great racket and waken Bowser the Hound, and he would waken his master, and that is just what we mustn't do if we hope to ever get in here again. I thought you had more sense, Reddy." Reddy looked a little shamefaced. "Well, if we don't do that, how are we going to get them? We can't fly," he grumbled. "You stay right where you are," snapped Granny, "and take care that you don't make a sound." Then Granny jumped lightly to a little shelf that ran along in front of the nesting boxes. From this she could reach the lower roost, on which 4 fat hens were asleep. Very gently she pushed her head in between 2 of these and crowded them apart. Sleepily they protested and moved along a little. Granny continued to crowd them. At last one of them stretched out her head to see who was crowding so. Like a flash, Granny seized that head, and Biddy never knew what had wakened her, nor did she have a chance to waken the others. Dropping the hen at Reddy's feet, Granny crowded another until she did the same thing, and just the same thing happened once more. Then Granny jumped lightly down, picked up one of the hens by the neck, slung the body over her shoulder, and told Reddy to do the same with the other, and start for home. "Aren't you going to get any more while we have the chance?" grumbled Reddy. "Enough is enough," retorted Granny. "We've got a dinner for 2, and so far no one is any the wiser. Perhaps these 2 won't be missed, and we'll have a chance to get some more another night. Now, come on." This was plain common sense, and Reddy knew it. So, without another word, he followed old Granny Fox out by the way they had entered, and then home to the best dinner he had had for a long time. The trouble is that troubles are, more frequently than not, brought on by naught but carelessness, by someone who forgot. Granny Fox had hoped that those two hens she and Reddy had stolen from Farmer Brown's henhouse would not be missed, but they were. They were missed the very first thing the next morning when Farmer Brown's boy went to feed the biddies. He discovered right away that the little sliding door, which should have closed the opening through which the hens went in and out of the house, was open. And then he remembered that he had left the henyard gate open the night before. Carefully, Farmer Brown's boy examined the hole with the sliding door. "Ha!" said he presently, and held up 2 red hairs which he had found on the edge of the door. "Ha! I thought as much. I was careless last night and didn't fasten this door, and I left the gate open. Reddy Fox has been here, and now I know what has become of those 2 hens. I suppose it serves me right for my carelessness. And I suppose, if the truth were known, those hens were of more real good to him than they ever could have been to me, because the poor fellow must be having pretty hard work to get a living these hard winter days. Still, I can't have him stealing any more. That would never do at all. If I shut them up every night and am not careless, he can't get them. But accidents will happen, and I might do just as I did last night. Think I had locked up when I hadn't. I don't like to set a trap for Reddy, but I must teach the rascal a lesson. If I don't, he will get so bold that those chickens won't be safe even in the broad daylight." Now, at just that very time, over in their home, Granny and Reddy Fox were talking over plans for the future, and shrewd old Granny was pointing out to Reddy how necessary it was that they should keep away from that henyard for some time. "We've had a good dinner, a splendid dinner, and if we are smart enough, we may be able to get more good dinners where this one came from," said she. "But we certainly won't if we are too greedy." "But I don't believe Farmer Brown's boy has missed those 2 chickens, and I don't see any reason at all why we shouldn't go back there tonight and get 2 more if he is stupid enough to leave that gate and little door open," whined Reddy. "Maybe he hasn't missed those 2, but if we should take 2 more he certainly would miss them, and he would guess what had become of them, and that might get us into no end of trouble," snapped Granny. "We are not starving now, and the best thing for us to do is to keep away from that henhouse until we can't get anything to eat anywhere else. Now you mind what I tell you, Reddy, and don't you dare go near there." Reddy promised, and so it came about that Farmer Brown's boy hunted up a trap all for nothing, so far as Reddy and Granny were concerned. Very carefully he bound strips of cloth around the jaws of the trap, for he couldn't bear to think of those cruel jaws cutting into the leg of Reddy, should he happen to get caught. You see, Farmer Brown's boy didn't intend to kill Reddy if he should catch him, but to make him a prisoner for a while, and so keep him out of mischief. That night he hid the trap very cunningly just inside the henhouse, where anyone creeping through that little hole made for the hens to go in and out would be sure to step in it. Then he purposefully left the little sliding door open part way, as if it had been forgotten, and he also left the henyard gate open, just as he had done the night before. "There now, Master Reddy," said he, talking to himself. "I rather think that you are going to get into trouble before morning." And doubtless Reddy would have done just that thing, but for the wisdom of sly old Granny. Danger comes when least expected. 'Tis often near when not expected. The long, hard winter had passed, and spring had come. Prickly Porky, the porcupine, came down from a tall poplar tree and slowly stretched himself. He was tired of eating. He was tired of swinging in the treetop. "I believe I'll have a sun bath," said Prickly Porky, and lazily walked toward the edge of the Green Forest in search of a place where the sun lay warm and bright. Now, Prickly Porky's stomach was very, very full. He was fat, and naturally lazy. So when he came to the doorstep of an old house just on the edge of the Green Forest, he sat down to rest. It was sunny and warm there, and the longer he sat there, the less like moving he felt. He looked about him with his dull eyes and grunted to himself. "It's a deserted house. Nobody lives here, and I guess nobody'll care if I take a nap right here on the doorstep," said Prickly Porky to himself. "And I don't care if they do," he added, for Prickly Porky the Porcupine was afraid of nobody and nothing. So Prickly Porky made himself as comfortable as possible, yawned once or twice, tried to wink at jolly round red Mr. Sun, who was winking and smiling down at him, and then fell fast asleep right on the doorstep of the old house. Now, the old house had been deserted. Nobody had lived in it for a long, long time, a very long time indeed. But it happened that, the night before, old Granny Fox and Reddy Fox had had to move out of their nice home on the edge of the Green Meadows because Farmer Brown's boy had found it. Reddy was very stiff and sore, for he had been shot by a hunter. He was so sore he could hardly walk and could not go very far. So old Granny Fox had led him to the old deserted house and put him to bed in that. "No one will think of looking for us here, for everyone knows that no one lives here," said old Granny Fox, as she made Reddy as comfortable as possible. As soon as it was daylight, Granny Fox slipped out to watch for Farmer Brown's boy, for she felt sure that he would come back to the house they had left, and sure enough he did. He brought a spade and dug the house open, and all the time old Granny Fox was watching him from behind a fence corner and laughing to think she had been smart enough to move in the night. But Reddy Fox didn't know anything about this. He was so tired that he slept and slept and slept. It was the middle of the morning when finally he awoke. He yawned and stretched, and when he stretched he groaned because he was so stiff and sore. Then he hobbled up toward the doorway to see if old Granny Fox had left any breakfast outside for him. It was dark, very dark. Reddy was puzzled. Could it be that he had gotten up before daylight? That he hadn't slept as long as he thought? Perhaps he had slept the whole day through, and it was night again. My, how hungry he was! "I hope Granny has caught a fine fat chicken for me," thought Reddy, and his mouth watered. Just then he ran bump into something. "Ow!" screamed Reddy Fox and clapped both hands to his nose. Something was sticking into it. It was one of the sharp little spears that Prickly Porky hides in his coat. Reddy Fox knew then why the old house was so dark. Prickly Porky was blocking up the doorway. A boasting tongue, as sure as fate, will trip its owner soon or late. Prickly Porky the Porcupine was enjoying himself. There was no doubt about that. He was stretched across the doorway of that old house, the very house in which old Granny Fox had been born. When he had lain down on the doorstep for a nap and sunbath, he had thought that the old house was still deserted. Then he had fallen asleep, only to be wakened by Reddy Fox, who had been asleep in the old house and who couldn't get out because Prickly Porky was in the way. Now, Prickly Porky does not love Reddy Fox, and the more Reddy begged and scolded and called him names, the more Prickly Porky chuckled. It was such a good joke to think that he had trapped Reddy Fox, and he made up his mind that he would keep Reddy in there a long time, just to tease him and make him uncomfortable. You see, Prickly Porky remembered how often Reddy Fox played mean tricks on little meadow and forest folks who are smaller and weaker than himself. "It will do him good. It certainly will do him good," said Prickly Porky, and rattled the 1,000 little spears hidden in his long coat, for he knew that the very sound of them would make Reddy Fox shiver with fright. Suddenly, Prickly Porky pricked up his funny little short ears. He heard the deep voice of Bowser the Hound, and it was coming nearer and nearer. Prickly Porky chuckled again. "I guess Mr. Bowser is going to have a surprise. I certainly think he is," said Prickly Porky, as he made all the 1,000 little spears stand out from his long coat till he looked like a funny great chestnut burr. Bowser the Hound did have a surprise. He was hunting Reddy Fox, and he almost ran into Prickly Porky before he saw him. The very sight of those 1,000 little spears sent little cold chills chasing each other down Bowser's backbone, clear to the tip of his tail. For he remembered how he had gotten some of them in his lips and mouth once upon a time, and how it had hurt to have them pulled out. Ever since then he had had the greatest respect for Prickly Porky. "Wow!" yelped Bowser the Hound, stopping short. "I beg your pardon, Prickly Porky. I beg your pardon. I didn't know you were taking a nap here." All the time Bowser the Hound was backing away as fast as he could. Then he turned around, put his tail between his legs, and actually ran away. Slowly Prickly Porky unrolled, and his little eyes twinkled as he watched Bowser the Hound run away. "Bowser's very big and strong. His voice is deep, his legs are long. His bark scares some almost to death, but as for me, he wastes his breath. I just roll up and shake my spears, and Bowser is the one who fears." So said Prickly Porky and laughed aloud. Just then he heard a light footstep and turned to see who was coming. It was old Granny Fox. She had seen Bowser run away, and now she was anxious to find out if Reddy Fox were safe. "Good morning," said Granny Fox, taking care not to come too near. "Good morning," replied Prickly Porky, hiding a smile. "I'm very tired and would like to go inside my house. Had you just as soon move?" asked Granny Fox. "Oh!" exclaimed Prickly Porky. "Is this your house? I thought you lived over on the Green Meadows." "I did, but I've moved. Please let me in," replied Granny Fox. "Certainly, certainly. Don't mind me, Granny Fox. Step right over me," said Prickly Porky, and smiled once more, and at the same time rattled his little spears. Instead of stepping over him, Granny Fox backed away. "Who keeps a watch upon his toes need never fear he'll bump his nose." Now, there is nothing like being shut in alone in the dark to make one think. A voice inside Reddy began to whisper to him. "If you hadn't tried to be smart and show off, you wouldn't have brought all this trouble on yourself and old Granny Fox," said the voice. "I know it," replied Reddy, right out loud, forgetting that it was only a small voice inside of him. "What do you know?" asked Prickly Porky. He was still keeping Reddy in and Granny out, and he had overheard what Reddy said. "It's none of your business," snapped Reddy. Reddy could hear Prickly Porky chuckle. Then Prickly Porky repeated, as if to himself, in a queer cracked voice, the following. "Rudeness never, never pays, nor is there gain in saucy ways. It's always best to be polite, and ne'er give way to ugly spite. If that's the way you feel inside, you'd better all such feelings hide. For he must smile who hopes to win, and he who loses best will grin." Reddy pretended that he hadn't heard. Prickly Porky continued to chuckle for a while, and finally Reddy fell asleep. When he awoke, it was to find that Prickly Porky had left, and old Granny Fox had brought him something to eat. Just as soon as Reddy was able to travel, he and Granny had moved to the Old Pasture. The Old Pasture is very different from the Green Meadows or the Green Forest. Yes, indeed, it is very, very different. Reddy Fox thought so, and Reddy didn't like the change, not a bit. All about were great rocks, and around and over them grew bushes and young trees and bullbriars with long, ugly thorns, and blackberry and raspberry canes that seemed to have a million little hooked hands, reaching to catch in and tear his red coat and to scratch his face and hands. There were little open places where wild-eyed young cattle fed on the short grass. They had made many paths all crisscross among the bushes, and when you tried to follow one of these paths, you never could tell where you were coming out. No, Reddy Fox did not like the old pasture at all. There was no long, soft green grass to lie down in, and it was lonesome up there. He missed the little people of the Green Meadows and the Green Forest. There was no one to bully and tease. And it was such a long, long way from Farmer Brown's henyard that old Granny Fox wouldn't even try to bring him a fat hen. At least, that's what she told Reddy. The truth is, wise old Granny Fox knew that the very best thing she could do was to stay away from Farmer Brown's for a long time. She knew that Reddy couldn't go down there because he was still too lame and sore to travel such a long way, and she hoped that by the time Reddy was well enough to go, he would have learned better than to do such a foolish thing as to try to show off by stealing a chicken in broad daylight, as he had when he brought all this trouble on them. Down on the Green Meadows, the home of Granny and Reddy Fox had been on a little knoll, which you know is a little low hill, right where they could sit on their doorstep and look all over the Green Meadows. It had been very, very beautiful down there. They had made lovely little paths through the tall green meadow grass, and the buttercups and daisies had grown close up to their very doorstep. But up here in the old pasture, Granny Fox had chosen the thickest clump of bushes and young trees she could find, and in the middle was a great pile of rocks. Way in among these rocks, Granny Fox had dug their new house. It was right down under the rocks. Even in the middle of the day, jolly round red Mr. Sun could hardly find it with a few of his long bright beams. All the rest of the time it was dark and gloomy there. No, Reddy Fox didn't like his new home at all, and when he said so, old Granny Fox boxed his ears. "It's your fault that we've got to live here now," said she. "It's the only place where we are safe. Farmer Brown's boy will never find this home, and even if he did, he couldn't dig into it as he did into our old home on the Green Meadows. Here we are, and here we've got to stay, all because a foolish little fox thought himself smarter than anybody else and tried to show off." Reddy hung his head. "I don't care," he said, which was very, very foolish, because, you know, he did care a very great deal. And here we will leave wise old Granny Fox and Reddy, safe, even if they do not like their new home. You see, Lightfoot the Deer is getting jealous. He thinks there should be some books about the people of the Green Forest, and that the first one should be about him. And because we all love Lightfoot the Deer, the very next book is to bear his name.